A couple of days ago, I was thinking about making another video and trying to figure out what kind of a video I should make. I've been working on genealogy quite a bit, so I thought, well, I think I'll use old records and pictures and put together about my Farnham line and them heading west. And it only took them 287 years to head west from England to California. So anyway, here's what I put together for that. When you look at the passenger list for the ship James that sailed in 1635 to America from England, you'll see Ralph and Alice Farnham and their three children. The 32-year-old Ralph, barber slash surgeon, is my eighth great grandfather. The 2-year-old Ralph, he's my seventh great grandfather. And his son Ralph is my sixth great grandfather. They departed England 13th of July, 1635, and they arrived in Boston late September of 1635, and they were destined for Ipswich. My eighth great grandfather, Ralph Farnham, passed away in Ipswich in 1648. Alice and the children then went on to Andover, Massachusetts. You have probably already noticed when you have a Ralph father, have a son named Ralph, have a grandson named Ralph, on and on and on. Then when you say junior and senior, it can be a little difficult because maybe you were a senior today, but when you have a son that's a junior and he has a son with the same name, junior becomes a senior. I think I'll just say Ralph 1, Ralph 2, Ralph 3, Ralph 4. It's easier than junior and senior. As I mentioned earlier, Alice and her children moved on to Andover, Massachusetts. And here you can see this plan was written in 1692. And if you look at where people live, there's Ralph Farnham down there. Well, that's Ralph 3. This Ralph Farnham is my sixth great grandfather. You notice on this death record, this particular Ralph Farnham Sr. died in 1692. So this would be my Ralph II. The year 1692 might make you think of something else that had happened during that time frame. That's the Salem witch trials. Here is a summons for Ralph Farnham and John Farnham to appear at the Salem trials for a Martha Carrier. My Ralph Farnham 1 and 2 have passed away, so this is my Ralph Farnham 3. Even though there is no record showing that Ralph and John appeared for this summons, Martha still was hung on 19th of August, 1692 in Salem. On one of my genealogy trips to Andover, I checked out this cemetery. Here's the first headstone that I saw. I know it's a little hard to read, so I transcribed it. It says, erected in memory of Timothy Farnham, who departed this life July the 25th, 1780, at the age of 78 years. I found a headstone that had my name on it. My fifth, fourth, and third great grandfathers had moved westward into Connecticut. My second great grandfather, Edmund Farnham, moved away from Connecticut and headed westward. First, he went into New York. He met his future wife, Eliza Crandall, and in 1849, Erastus Farnham was born in Chautauqua, New York. They moved down the Allegheny River and found themselves in Pennsylvania, in Warren County. In Spring Creek, Warren County, Pennsylvania, my great-grandfather, Horace James Farnham, was born. Also in Pennsylvania, two of his brothers and a sister. There's Lorena, and then in the middle is Luther and William on the right. In the 1850s, oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. And when my great grandfather Horace James was in his 20s, he was working in the oil fields. What you see here is the town called Pit Hole, Pennsylvania. Now, Horace James and a bunch of his buddies decided they thought they'd do something different, like head out west, but they didn't know exactly what they wanted to do. Either go and mine for gold or maybe hunt buffalo. So they made their decision by throwing a cow pie. If it came up wet, then they'd go and look for gold. If it came up dry, then they would go to Texas and hunt buffalo. Came up dry, so they headed off to Texas. They followed the rivers, first the Allegheny to the Ohio, following the Ohio to the Mississippi River. Once they got to the Mississippi River, headed south till they got to the Red River, and then up and west to Texas. Horace James and his buddies used Wichita Falls as their base camp. Some of his hunting buddies were like James Orville, Mr. Holmes, John Wesley, Joe Dawson. When they started buffalo hunting, a hide was $3-4 per hide, but after a couple of years, I guess they were buffalo hunting for about 3 or 4 years. After about 3 or 4 years, the price got down to 75 cents a hide, so it really wasn't worth buffalo hunting anymore. As you can see in the 1880 census, Horace James is now a farmer. This is where Horace met his future wife. They were married on April the 4th, 1883. You can see here in 1895, Horace James took a class in accounting. Then he ran for a few offices and won. By 1895, Horace and Eugenia have 6 kids. The little boy on Horace's lap, that's my grandpa, Jack McCarty Farnham. They had a ranch in Silverton, Texas. That's where my grandpa was born. They were there until 1902, and then they up and moved, went to Bethel, New Mexico. They had about 300 head of cattle, about 30 horses, and I believe 2 wagons with all their possessions. Here they are on their homestead in Bethel, New Mexico. You can see Oakley on the far left, and the far right is Horace James. Next to Horace is my grandpa. And then where it says Alice, that's their 9th child. She was born in Bethel, and the other 8 were born in Texas. Grandpa fought in World War I, and when he got back, he went to work for the railroad. And while he was on one of his trips, he met somebody by the name of Gordon Granger Webb. And that happened to have been his future wife's father-in-law. So he met his future wife, Stella Webb, through her dad. Usually it's the man that serenades the woman. However, in this case, my grandmother, she bought a guitar from Sears and Roebuck catalog, and she serenaded my grandpa. This was just about 1919 time frame. Then they went and got married in 1920. They actually eloped. They went to Oklahoma and got married. Here's a photo of my grandparents' wedding day. A couple years later, on April the 2nd, 1922, my dad was born. In 1922, they all upped and moved to California. with the exception of Oakley Farnham. He had a pretty good sized ranch at that point in time. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, my grandpa recorded his story about moving to California. So I'll just let you hear what he had to say. This is quite a bit shorter than what he said, but it gives you the idea.
Tell a little here about our first trip when we first came out to California. They was Stella and I, and Pershing was a baby, and Irene and our mother. And we was in this old T-model Ford from Taos, New Mexico to California. Stella and I traded a bunch of chickens to Gertrude and Forrest McCowan for this year old T-model 19 and 15 Ford. One unusual thing to us was that when we got to California, we still had New Mexico air in them tires. And I was used to having a flat about every few miles, so that is something for us to think about, to carry some air that far without running out. But the first day we made 90 miles. That was down to Roswell, New Mexico, and we thought we done very good. We didn't start off too early. And Mama, she wanted me to drive around and look for a place to stay. It is real cold. I think she is a real good manager. I don't know if we'd have made it or not without her. But anyway, while we run on to a vacant house, and she went over and talked to the woman next door. And this woman let her have the house for 50 cents that night, and we slept in that house. The next morning, of course, we had a little trouble getting started. Always had to jack up a hind wheel and heat water, and before you could get this old cart cranked. And our next stop was Santa Patricia, New Mexico, where our sister Jessie used to teach school at. She stayed with a Spanish family there, and from Roswell to Santa Patricia, we had to go up this, what they call the White Mountain. And this old Ford, it got slower and slower, and it finally gave up the ghost on the way up this mountain there. And we was trying to push it, one to drive, and the rest of us are pushing, and there's a Mexican come along and horseback. So he put his rope on the saddle horn and tied onto the old car, and he'd go along pulling this old car, and the rest of us pushing. So that is quite a deal, getting up this mountain. San Patricio and El Paso, we came upon a big sand bed where they was working on the road. And they had a team of horses there where they had to tow everybody through this sand. It must have been a quarter of a mile through there, and the people would line up and take turns being towed through. And there was one guy, he drove up there in a great big Cadillac, looked like he had a lot of money, and he didn't want to wait his turn. So he pulled out around everybody, and he was going to show us how to get through that sand. Well, he got out there not very many yards, and he got stuck clear up to the bed of the car. And so this guy that was towing him across, he just ignored him, left him out there. He really did raise Cain. He pulled through a whole bunch of cars after that guy's turn, so I guess he learned a good lesson there. Our next stop was at a ghost town on our way down to El Paso there, and there wasn't nobody lived in this town, and we didn't have no trouble finding a house because all you had to do was just drive up and down the street and pick out the house that you wanted to stay in. From there, we made it into El Paso, Texas. After we left El Paso, we had a little pavement there, and that's the first pavement that this old car had ever seen before. And we got up on that pavement and get going about 35 miles an hour. And them wheels, of course, they was all loose, and that old car would get to shimmying, and we didn't know what was the matter. That thing would darn near throw you out of the car. It took us about 2 more days to get on up to Rincon, New Mexico. When we left Rincon to Deming, New Mexico, and that's where we stayed all night on our next night on our trip. When we got ready to leave Deming, why, the fan belt kept running off this old car, and I had to get a stick and put a guide on there, and I had to keep that on there the rest of the trip, keep this fan belt from running off with us all the time, running off. And the next night, well, we made it over to Lordsburg, New Mexico. Lordsburg, New Mexico was one about the coldest places that we had on the trip, I think. We always called it Iceberg after that, and we sure like to froze out, and we had to buy a cord of wood, and next morning, why, we couldn't crank this old car. We jacked up the hind wheel and poured in hot water and done everything else, but it was about noon. The next stop we made after we left Douglas was a little railroad siding. There was a little bitty teeny depot where we slept. It was only about 3 or 4 feet from where the train went along, and it'd feel like it was about to raise you out of the bed when one of them freight trains would come along. After this, why, we slept out every night, and after we left Bisbee, Arizona, why, we had to go down quite a mountain there. And I never had been used to driving in the mountains, so I used my brake too much and burnt the brakes off. Well, then I got to using the reverse, and I finally burnt it all off. My hair was sticking straight up, and I was pretty much scared. And Mama told me to run the thing into the side of the mountain, but it was going a little too fast. I told Irene to jump out and throw some rocks under the wheel, and so finally we got to a place where this road was a little bit more level, and I got to rubbing the side of the mountain. Finally got it slowed down, and we stopped there, where there was a little town down at the foot of the mountains there, and stayed all night. And next morning, why, we put the brakes on the car. The next place we arrived was Phoenix, Arizona, and we looked for some people that Mama knew there, but we couldn't find them. We was looking for work, and somebody told us to go over to Glendale. Well, we went over there, but we didn't find any work over there, and somebody told us to go back to Temple, which was not very far away, and the only work we could find was picking cotton. So this man there had a lot of cotton. He gave us a job, and we moved into a little tent. He had a row of little tents there, and that's where we lived, in one of them little tents. And we picked cotton for this man there for, maybe a week, I don't know. While we was at this place picking cotton, I made a few dollars there, and I told this man I want to put some oversized pistons in this old car. Bigger ones, but he got me some tractor pistons, and I put them in there. One of them was a little bit tight. It's the one that hadn't froze up, but it worked in all right, though. When we left Phoenix, why, we come out to a little town, just, not many miles this side of Phoenix. That's where the road forks there. One of these roads went to Yuma, and the other one went on what they call a Blythe Cutoff. And we had to look at them roads a long time before we could figure which one to take. I think Mama finally decided that we would try the Blythe Cutoff. We got over to the Colorado River on our way to Blythe. Why, you had to cross the river there on a barge. They charge you $2.50 to take your car across the river there. I remember that was just an old flat barge, and they had a 2x4 nailed along the edge, and I had to drive right up against that 2x4. They told us there about a car or two drove off in the river, so that kind of made my hair stand up a little bit there. But Mama, she wanted to go on across. We wanted to wait till morning, but she was anxious to get into California, so we was the last one. This guy, he took us on across. We found a place to camp after we got across the river there, and next day I went down there. I seen an outfit down there making a levee on the Colorado River, and I wanted to get some work there for a little while.
They eventually made it to Corona. This silent home movie was made back in the late 50s in Corona, at the Corona City Park. Here we have 8 of the 9 children of Horace James Farnham and Mary Eugenia Boone. Georgie Alice, Tom, there's Gertrude, and there's my grandpa, Jack. There's Beulah, Maud, Irene, and Oakley. There's my dad on the right taking a picture, and I'm in the center with a striped shirt. I think my dad was having me hold a case to hold all of his cameras.